For those of you on the video podcast watching us live stream, it's Thursday. Probably, it's still 9 o'clock according to my clock. I know I was a couple seconds late tonight. The buttons weren't working. Surprise, surprise. My fancy high-end equipment fails again. And Derek over there with his laptop and his $60 mic rolls.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not responsible for this. I'm the entertainment part of the show.
Yes. You are the comic relief.
Yeah, I mean, especially for those watching. I mean, I have
it's usually me.
Face for radio.
Oh.
So how's it going, John?
It's going.
Yeah, another Thursday night, another No Driving Gloves podcast.
Yes. I was trying to think if there's anything exciting or stupendous going on in the car rambling world. I will mention, and I've complained about my Fiat occasionally that I had and my disgust with the dealership. And I had a bittersweet moment yesterday as I drove by the Fiat Alfa Romeo Maserati dealership, and the last of their inventory was being loaded on a transporter as the dealership has went out of business.
I wonder why that is.
I will say I'm not as happy as I would normally be, because I did meet a recent investor in the business and really nice guy. And he was doing a lot trying to make the thing work, and obviously it didn't. And it's going to be a Subaru dealership under new ownership. So that's the way the cookie crumbles.
Hey, those Subarus sell hotcakes.
Those what?
So those Subarus are selling like hotcakes out there.
Subarus seem to be a pretty popular automobile product. And
yeah, they just built a brand new dealership in Nashville. So,
I mean, they just kind of rolling along. And somebody was talking about, they've got the Subaru BRZ, and they've got a kind of a sportier model of it now. And then they, I think they announced they're going to bring back the STI in one of their models. So maybe they're finally going to get back into a little bit of a performance thing as opposed to the camping, I guess, the camping contingent.
Well, but I think that was always the nice thing about Subaru, or maybe not the nice thing might be the wrong thing to say there, but kind of the unique flavor of Subaru was that they never really did the just daily road car, right? They were kind of always known as either your sport car, your WRXs, things like that, or a really good rugged mountainous type vehicle, right? Kind of off-roadish, not like lifted, Jeep going, but you're kind of rugged off-road mountain terrain type vehicles. And within maybe the last decade or so, maybe 2 decades, they started playing around in that road car class more so heavily, and got rid of some of the sportier and they kind of always kept that rugged off-road life, mountainous terrain life vehicle, but I think that's their niche. That's who likes them. Either if you're a sport car person, you're into the WRXs and the BRZs, and if you live out in Washington State, Oregon, or New Hampshire, Vermont, places like that, Maine, you're going to get the more rugged Subaru Outbacks and things like that for the dirt terrain you're typically driving down.
Well, that's I think that's not to make this all about Subaru, but that's where Subaru has always had its problem, is when they've deviated from that all-wheel drive, all-purpose car, because they did the XT, and I had a Subaru XT, and fun little car, but it really wasn't Subaru. It was just quirky. And then, of course, the XVX. And the BRZ just doesn't even quite fit their fold. I mean, the joint venture with Toyota, and Toyota seems to be getting all the cool go fast stuff, and the
Yeah.
BRZ just exists. And it's just a rear wheel drive sports car. You know, it's not the all wheel drive, but the all wheel drive stuff is where Subaru is at. And one of the little bits of trivia about the celebrities and that own cars, that Seinfeld loves, you know, big Porsche guy, Seinfeld loves his Subarus. And that's what he keeps those at his New Hampshire home or Long Island home or wherever he lives in the Northeast. But I mean, so I think I've never been in a Subaru that's upset me. I mean, even the X had a BRZ. It was a fun car. I would have a Miata over a BRZ because I like convertibles. And heard a couple interviews with Dario Franchitti this week. It made a hell of a lot of sense about owning a convertible.
So. Yes, he did.
I think,
yeah. But yeah, I mean, we have, you know, and I've mentioned it on the show before. We had we had a Subaru as well, and we had an Outback, and my wife loved that car. And although it was one of the older ones, so it was, you know, it wasn't luxurious by any means. It was still the kind of, you know, you close the door and it was still kind of tinny when it closed, and you know the interior wasn't you know, of luxury. It was a lot of plastic and stuff, but that was a rugged vehicle that did well for us. And the only reason she does not own, I'm sorry, did I say an Outback? She had a Forester. The only reason we don't own another Subaru now, SUV, is Subaru people, if you're listening, like from the company, the dealership we went to treated us like absolute crap. And we turned around and walked out of that dealership and never looked back. And, you know, the General Motors dealership treated us better, gave us way better trade in value on the Forester. And so we wound up back in a GM vehicle. So, you know, Subarus are great vehicles. We loved owning the one we owned. And, you know, had that dealership treated us right, we'd probably still be Subaru owners to this day.
may your Subaru dealership suffer the same consequences my Fiat dealership did. And in
Yes.
Jason's commenting about we should do a show on cars John hasn't owned. And if those watching, had my head bouncing around between all my monitors because I was pulling up my car list. I've only had 59 cars, and a lot of those have been Fords, and a lot of those have been Fords. Hondas, Chrysler products. So there's a lot of cars I haven't owned.
That could be a whole season of no driving gloves.
Well, we did talk about that. We did talk about that once, doing a little quick 5 minutes in every episode and picking a car that we've owned and giving a review.
Yeah. Moving on.
Couldn't tell you much about the 78 Oldsmobile Delta 88 I owned. I won it in a poker game, and I had the title, and I never walked over and even saw the car. It was a couple blocks away.
Jeez.
Couldn't tell you what color it is. Couldn't just.
It was pink. It was a pink Cadillac.
I would be so upset if it was pink.
Well, in this scenario, it was, John. It was. And to answer Jason's next question, no, none of our vehicles get any stickers on them, bumper stickers, anything in the back glass, anything like that. Sorry. My trucks did have this amazing little blue and white sticker in the back glass that said no driving gloves, because it's the best automotive podcast there is. But no, we don't. We don't even. We actually remove the dealership stickers off of the back of the cars they put on. We removed it off the Acadia we own, and when I bought the Malibu, my salesman, who knew me well enough, he said, "So don't even bother putting the dealership decal on the back." I'm like, "I'm just gonna throw it away." So, okay, we won't put it on.
I remember back when we bought our 84 Chrysler, or excuse me, Dodge 600 ES turbo convertible. The dealer, as we actually bought that car used, and the previous owner had the same fetish as you, but the dealership absolutely required they put a sticker on it. So they put the sticker behind where the rear license plate goes. So if
Yeah,
you
there
took
you
the
go.
rear license plate off, you saw the dealership sticker. So,
The only car of mine that I will own that is going to have the dealership decal on it is my 1917 Overland Model 90 Roadster. And why is that? Because when I bought it and yeah, we got it all to my then garage where I was living then and started going through it, the very back panel of the body and the splash apron up front underneath the radiator had the probably like late 50s, early 60s ish, I would date it to. Remember the foil stickers, the silver foil stickers they had back then?
oh yeah, that was on that 600 I was talking about.
Yeah, so it had the dealership, uh, those stickers on it from when it was at a dealership in Cincinnati, and like I say, probably the 50s. And so I'm recreating those to put back on the car because I just love that part of the car's history and the fact that they were still there. So that will be the only car you see me driving around in that will have dealership stickers, and they're historic, and I don't even think the dealership still exists anymore. However, it was the dealership chain that the family that owns the Cincinnati Reds owned back then. I can't remember their name right off the top of my head, but it's kind of cool. So I got to put it on.
Uh, where was I going with the dealership stickers? Oh, you were talking about removing them, and I'll be honest, I haven't taken it off my Fiesta. Just it's Fiesta. I drive it for work. But the Mini, the BMW dealership never put a sticker on it. I don't think they put stickers. When I'm sitting here thinking about it, you notice a lot of the higher end cars don't necessarily have stickers. I mean, it depends on the dealership. I've seen some Lexus, Lexus dealerships that have them and some that don't, and things like that. But it's just one of those. It's always nice when you don't have to take it off. I mean, they might give you the dealership ad and your temporary tag or something, but
Yeah, the old license plates around. Ugh.
and for
Ugh.
some reason, it crossed my mind while you were talking about the dealership thing, and it's totally unrelated to anything except cars. But it's things dealerships do that are a little bit different. And I don't know how this ever occurred, but my grandfather had a Ford Country Squire station wagon back in the
Yeah,
late
Country
70s.
Squire.
And his were always white with the wood grain and all that. But the funny thing about this car is it had the old power, well, it had the radio antenna and it had a power radio antenna. But and they were always on the passenger side fender, if you remember. But for some reason, his car had a metal blanking plate put over where the radio antenna would be. And they had moved the radio antenna to the left front fender because of a better radio reception, especially with AM signals, because it made the radio antenna that much farther from the power lines, which were commonly on the sides of the roads and not buried back in the 70s. And I've never seen that on another car. And I remember him saying something about it, and I don't know if the dealership did it. I don't know if he had the dealership do it, but it's the only one of his cars that had it. It just seemed one of those odd things that happened with cars over the years, and maybe we'll dive into a whole episode on why we move our radio antennas to the left fender, since it's such a relevant topic in this day and age.
Well, and I mean, it ties in a little bit to tonight's topic, but not really because we're going to go down a different path. But those are the kind of things in the world of automotive conservation, historic vehicle conservation, restoration, and the museum world that I get very particular about because if you sent that to another, if you sent that to just your general run of the mill restoration shop to say, I want grandpa's country squire wagon restored. And you don't tell them anything about it. You don't tell them any of the stories. What are they going to do? They're going to move that antenna back to the right front fender because that's the way it came from factory. And they're going to erase the history of that and that story, right? I hate that. Like, no,
Yep.
leave it. Keep the story. That's what's important. It makes it different from every other country squire that's running around out there.
But then when 2038 rolls around and you've got your country squire at Pebble Beach and it's up for best of show, and the judges are going, that radio antenna is on the wrong side of that car. How do you prove it?
Easy. You tell them
The
they don't know
original
what they're
photos.
talking about.
Yeah,
They're
I've
Pebble
heard some
Beach
people.
judging.
I've heard some people heard some people discuss them trying to explain things to the Pebble Beach judges, and then I've know some Pebble Beach judges that in their interviews they go, "I don't know why I'm a judge. I don't know anything about these cars." So,
Exactly.
but that goes back
Yeah.
to exactly into our topic. If you had a museum, Derek,
I've had a lot of museums.
Derek's treasure hall of automobile and
Ugh, let's not get into
exquisite
naming
artifacts.
There's some rough names out there. There are some rough museum names out there that we won't dive into because we don't want to upset anyone on the show. But yeah, John, lately we talked a bit in the pre-show and in our messages back and forth over the last week about various. We always talk about topics, right? And within the last week or so, I've had a few conversations about museums, about automotive museums that I'm always, I mean, I'm 20 plus years in the automotive museum, transportation museum field now. And so I'm always thinking about the museums and the future of the museums and just where things are headed, right? And get into a lot of these conversations about the automobile museum and what it is and how can we better it. And you get into some really deep topics, but it really made me start thinking about a couple things that I felt we should probably talk about on No Driving Gloves. And one of the big ones is whether or not, I guess I'll pose it this way to you first, John. My biggest question is, are there too many automotive museums that are in existence and being formed, especially when we have quite a few automotive museums closing because they just can't find the way to keep the doors open? Are we the automobile is an extremely prolific artifact, right? I mean, for our society and culture, it's one of the greatest impacts on our life in history. And, you know, m- millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of automobiles have existed over time. So, and I mean, there's still all of those running around on the roads. So, does the automotive museum world in America around the globe need to be as prolific as the automobile is? Is it right that because we have so many automobiles in the world, we have a lot of automotive museums? I don't know. What do you think, John? Where do you stand on the idea of how many automotive museums there needs to be?
Well, I was going to say I'm standing on a pile of notebooks with all the questions you posed me, but I simply put it back. I'm not looking worldwide. I look United States. We're a
Yeah,
U.S.
we can
based
keep it to
podcast,
US for this.
but we're number one in Zimbabwe, but that's a whole nother realm.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. Thank you.
I think one of the problems with automotive museums in this country, and I don't see it with a lot of other museum or other, we've talked about it before, other artifacts, other collectibles. They are too many automotive museums are tech shelters, and they skate the lines of being a museum. All they are is a car collector who's figured out how to write off his hobby. And I lean to the red side a lot politically. But I don't, it's one of these things that I don't, to necessarily agree with, because you're not operating a museum. You're not doing it for the benefit of the public. You're not doing it to educate people. You open the bare minimum of hours, 6 hours, 12 hours a week, whatever it's required to let the general public in. And let's take the Mullen collection. I don't mean to insult the late Peter Mullen, but the ticket prices were outrageous. The hours were almost impossible for a normal person to go to. It's wrong. I mean, Harold LeMay got it right. Henry Ford got it right. I'm not even sure Collier has it right with the Revs Institute, but that's the biggest problem I see. Is there so many little mom and pop museums that pop up just so that somebody can own 20 or 30 cars and write them off and write off their maintenance. And hey, I have a museum, without any understanding of the museum, without the benefiting of the public. And what it does is it cheapens the quality museums, because you drive through a town and you see the Packard Museum. And there was one hidden in Fort Lauderdale. It's a great museum. I don't know if it still exists. It might have actually closed, but it was a great collection. But you see it and you go, I'm not going to stop there. It's a jungy little building. Turns out to be a fabulous collection. Or the one that I stumbled across, and I got the brochure here. Let's see here. The Car and Carriage Caravan Museum, historic transportation on display at Luray Caverns, Virginia. That's a pretty cool car museum, but I'm not going to think that's a cool museum. I'm going to think that to me sounds like Volo Automotive Museum, which is a car dealership in northern Indiana or Chicago or Illinois.
Yep.
It irritates me. And that's my problem with museums. There's a car museum in town. Do I really want to drive so far? And, and I can sit here and question, is this museum done for the benefit of the public, or is this museum done for this reason or that reason? And like you said, some of these with the true heart and passion about being a museum are dying and struggling and doing whatever they can to support themselves. We ran an episode, just a short 10-minute episode a few weeks ago, talking with Eric Perrin, and he's working with the International Motorsports Hall of Fame Museum at Talladega. And that's a museum that basically has one person that works at it and is struggling. And Eric has built a massive fundraiser for him and brings in serious money for them every year, and has constructed not necessarily a restoration team, but they are struggling to survive and get a name for themselves, because even at Talladega, and they're not that far off the interstate, Talladega has a couple of big races a year. They don't get a lot of traffic because who knows if it's a good museum or not. And that's, my biggest thing. I'm not stopping unless somebody has raved and raved and raved about a museum. And I'll even go to the Barber Vintage Motorsports Museum. The first time I ever contemplated going there, I was doing work in Huntsville, about 2 hours away. And I go, I'm bored. I'm here I had to stay over the weekend. I'm bored. I think there's a Lotus collection somewhere. It can't be that big. And then you come down to this 250,000 square foot work of art for a building, and you're going, whoa, this isn't what I expected to find in Alabama. But you never know. So, to go back to where you said, I'm tired of all the tax shelter museums and museums founded for the wrong reasons that only exist for somebody's 20 years of passion for having a car collection.
Yes, exactly. And I'm glad you said some of the things you said about, serving the public, because that's the end goal. To back up, to let you know, the Fort Lauderdale Antique Car Museum, one of the largest Packard collections at the time, has since closed. So no more going back to that, John. Now, if any of our listeners, whether you're watching the live stream or when you hear this on the audio podcast, if you want to gather a good understanding of how many automotive museums there are in the US, there is a website. It is the Automotive Museum Guide. Okay, so you can head over to the automotivemuseumguide.com and you can find every automotive museum that so far has been added to that guide. New ones pop up pretty regularly. This is actually put together and run by a gentleman named Sean Mathis, who, believe it or not, founded his own museum, automotive museum as well, the Miles Through Time Museum down in Georgia, which is doing fairly well, I will say. He's got a good plan for it. It is a nonprofit. Literally started with one car and a bunch of friends that wanted to kind of you know, have a car museum in that area and enjoy cars. So they're doing well, right? They just like all museums, they're struggling to get people in, but they're doing pretty good. So I highly recommend. You can also find on there a list of the closed automotive museums in the US. And I'm not sure how far he goes back date wise, but how old this list goes back. But there's a number of automotive museums on this that have closed. So that's what I'm talking about when I say, when we have so many closing, how many more do we need? Okay. But going right into what John talked about, kind of that next question I have for John, for our listeners, and if you're watching on the live stream, jump in the comments. Love to get you into the conversation. If you're listening on the audio podcast, send us your thoughts, whether you comment or leave a comment on the social media feed or send us an email, whatever. But another big question that I always come up with, John, or I always think about, and I'm going to get your feedback here. What feel do you want the automotive museum you're going to have? And what I mean by that, before you jump in, is do you want to walk into one of these automotive museums and have it be a giant warehouse of cars where they're literally just parked in rows in a steel beam structure building, and it's just a whole bunch of front ends lined up in rows that you just walk through and you look at the front end of each one? Do you want a more art gallery type approach where, vehicles are positioned, strategically around the gallery with well written labels, lighting, highlighting, parts of the vehicle that they want to focus on? Uh, do you want, an immersive type exhibit where you're actually in some type of vignette or diorama setting? What is most attractive to people in an automotive museum when you walk in? What is that feel that you want from an exhibit at an automotive museum? We all pretty much know what we're going to get when we go to an art gallery or an art museum, right? You can go to the DIA, Detroit Institute of Art, or the Cleveland Museum of Art, or name off any other art museum in the US, and you kind of know what the galleries are going to look right? You go into a Van Gogh gallery, there's going to be paintings hung on the wall, lit with a spotlight typically, label next to it. Usually the color of the room is something that is, complementary to the artwork that is on the wall. You go over to the arms and armor section, you're gonna see exhibit cases with some really sweet, arms and armor and chainmail and things like that. So we kind of know when we go to a natural history museum, we know that we're going to see some dinosaur bones, likely, skeletons, things like that. We're going to see, how the Earth was made, what the planetary system is like. When we go to a historical society or an American history museum, we pretty much kind of have a feel for what those galleries tend to look like. But it seems like when we go to automotive museums, it's a bit of a crapshoot, whether they just park cars in a building and call it a museum, or if they do something more immersive. But then I always think, like, well, what do people want when they come to an automotive museum? What do people actually want? How do they want to experience these vehicles as artifacts in a museum? What do you think, John?
I have a very set way. I like, be honest, I like a museum. I don't like, one reason I don't like art museums and natural history museums and that is they're like going to IKEA, and they have a way they want to funnel you through. And if you want to go back to something, it's almost impossible, or something's illogical, or all of a sudden you go from kitchens to living rooms to bathrooms and back to kitchens, or that last kitchen thing all of a sudden becomes I don't know, cactus. It's just something completely unrelated. It's like the Birmingham Museum of Art, great museum, largest collection of Wedgwood crystal in the world, and some things you don't realize is Wedgwood. But then they have, and no offense, they kind of have a tribute to Native Americans. That should be an American history museum more than an art museum. And it's presented as American history, which, yes, we all need to learn. We all need to respect. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just in the wrong damn building. When I went to the, and I can't remember the name of it because it's one of the newest museums on the National Mall. It's I think, the National Museum of the American Indian. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is a fabulous layout in the way it rotates you through and you see things. My ideal museum, my favorite museum that I've walked into is the National Air and Space Museum at Dulles Airport. Because you walk into it and you're in this big, massive warehouse. And it looks like a warehouse, but you walk in and you can virtually see everything from above. And there are kind of walkways above everything, and you can see everything, and you can go, oh, I want to see that. I need to see that. This is how it relates. It's still sectioned off, and this is the military aircraft, and this is personal transport, and this is the space shuttle, and it gives you some impressive views. And then everything's laid out with plenty of room to take photos, and it's not necessarily piled on top of each other, which you can do with airplanes because of varying wing heights and that, and very well explained. I enjoy that. And it's one of the things I liked about walking into the Barber Museum. While it's not quite as open, the whole center of the museum's open. You can ride their glass elevator and see everything. Problem with the Barber Museum? Too freaking crowded, too many exhibits. They have, last I knew, 800 or 900 motorcycles on display and 80 or 90 cars on display. And the cars are kind of now just lined up. There's no artistic value to them. The motorcycles have some coolness about them, but there's just too many of them now. I don't like going in and seeing a row of bumpers. I don't like going in and seeing stanchions, but we have to live with stanchions because we have to live with the general public and kids. And I just find it, inexcusable. And we had the same problem when I worked at the Barber Museum. People would wait to the very last thing they could do, and then they would sit on a bike or sit on a car because they knew they were going to get thrown out, but they were done anyway. Just excuse me, the various museums. I'm not a big fan of the Henry Ford. I didn't like the way it's laid out. I guess it's too compartmentalized. I want a big open room with everything in it. Or on the flip side, the National Corvette Museum with the rotunda with its, fake floor and all of that. That was a cool section. And I like some of the dioramas because it puts you in the time frame. And I like that about the Peterson. The Peterson has a lot of dioramas that, help set the stage for their exhibits. But then they have some floors that are kind of open that it's there to focus on the vehicle and the story behind the vehicle. But, you walk into that, like you said, metal pole barn or whatever, that's 150 cars all just backed in with a rope in front of them and not even a placard on them to tell you what it is. That's not a museum. That's somebody's garage writing it off. So I like the openness, or I like very expensive displays setting a time period in a mood. So
Yeah, either do it cheap and just park them in a big warehouse where I can see everything, or throw your budget at everything. So that you said some great things in there, John. And to give everybody an idea, obviously, one of my part of my degree background is museum studies, and obviously you have to go through an exhibits course and designing exhibits. So John, what you mentioned about going to like a natural history museum, that's what we tend to call a guided path exhibit, where we have a plan
IKEA.
to tell you the story. Yeah, the IKEA exhibit. How's that? We'll change that. Maybe I need to go back to museum studies. Maybe that's what they call it now, the IKEA method. Uh, but it's guided path because we're trying to tell you a story from beginning to end, right? We're trying to direct you in a certain way, and then there's kind of the open gallery method of the art galleries where things are positioned around, and you learn about each one, and everything in that room is connected to each other either through its creator or some little thing that connects it all together. So this is kind of one of the other big things that I see in the automotive museum world, or maybe the transportation museum world in general, maybe even the technology world in general, although possibly really every museum, which is I always say to anybody that's like, oh, I think I should open an auto museum. Okay. What you have to remember is that I could, clean up the shop here out back, the pole barn. I could put a sign out at the end of my driveway that says, Derek's Magnificent Museum of Motoring Wonders, and have the cars parked in the barn. And every car guy in the world, a car person, okay, every car person, man, woman, kid, whoever is in love with cars, will find a way to get here and see what those cars are. And they won't even care if there's no labels, because they're going to be like, "Oh, this is an old Chevy touring car. Oh, this is a 61 Ford Falcon, this whatever." But what about the people they bring with them that don't like cars? They don't think they like the automobile. How do we make sure that they are having a good time and actually learning something? Because as John said in his answer in the very beginning, first question was, how are we serving the public, right? And not just the automotive enthusiast public, But let's think about the people that come with them because they're probably on a family vacation or they're on, if you're in Nashville, they're on a bachelor party weekend or a lot of bachelorette parties swing in to the Lane Motor Museum. So, one of my challenges as a curator, exhibit designer, interpretive writer of exhibit labels is thinking about the fact that I can put anything related to the car on there and car people will eat it up, right? They'll be like, oh, yeah, or they'll walk around and they'll try to tell their buddies the story about the car and what it is. And then the buddy will go, the label says something different. That's always fun. But what's your take on that, John? When and I'm sure you've been to automotive museums, you worked in automotive museums where people come in and they're drug there by automotive enthusiasts. How do we keep them entertained? How do we make sure that they're learning something while they're at the museum?
You have to have the ability in your displays and your exhibits that go beyond, and that's where the dioramas sometimes come into play. Um, that it sets a time period and somebody goes, "Oh, I didn't realize that happened," or that attached to it, or we had a Model A pickup with a vintage gas pump next to it and a 20s era, I want to say gas pump, or you have things that relate from maybe the same company where you can go through. And with Vincent Motorcycles, they did they powered one of the earliest quote jet skis. They powered lawnmowers and things. And that just, I'm not there. I'm here looking, and I want to look at another motorcycle, but all of a sudden it stimulates you. Or why is there a lawnmower in here? And the spouse says that. Why is there a lawnmower in with all these motorcycles? And then the spouse, the couple learns, or the kids learn, why are these things there? You have to have things that distract or make them talk, or something that's interesting is, we'll use the Barber Museum because I go to it often. I'm very familiar with it. They have a Beatles Bentley that was owned by the Beatles, the whatever you want to call it, the flamboyant, swirly paint jobs and all that, with a London telephone booth and everything around it. A Bentley has nothing to do, that era of Bentley, 60s era Bentley, has nothing to do with motorsports, has nothing to do with motorcycles. But all of a sudden, the Beatles had this car, and what else here could? And then it makes people seek out. And then all of a sudden they're looking at, this movie motorcycle, the Lawrence Fishburne Bad Boys motorcycle or something. You have, you find things to display that make those that are not interested all of a sudden interested in seeking out what do we call them now? The Easter eggs. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the ways you keep people interested in being in a place they don't want to be, is letting them see beyond what's there. It's, again, Barber Vintage Motorsports Museum, known for almost 2,000 motorcycles in the collection, blah, blah, blah. Most people didn't even know there was a car collection there. But there's 100 car collection, which is more cars than some car museums have. And it's easy to lose 100 cars behind 2,000 motorcycles. And people don't go there because, it's just a motorcycle museum. No, there's a car museum there too. And as time's progressed, a lot of those cars have now creeped up where they're not behind the Golden Gates and, hidden. They're actually out on the floor being used. And every floor of the museum was designed to highlight a time period or something. And there's always a car on that floor from that time period. So you've got to you've got to have a little bit more than what your sign advertises. I'm trying to think. Um, where was I? I can't think of where I was, and I guess I even get bored if I go to a car museum and it's nothing but cars. I want to know something else. I want to find those Easter eggs, but the thing is to stimulate, keep it related to the exhibit, but um, have the what do I want to say? Have the machines tools. Show me how it's made. Go back to Birmingham Museum of Art in their pottery exhibit. I could care less to look at all this pottery. And I mean, it's fabulous pottery and it's priceless. And, from all these various um, countries and locations in Africa. But you know what stimulates me there? The video telling me how it's done and showing these people shaping the pottery and firing the pottery. And all of a sudden I'm interested. And then I see this and then I can relate it back to this artifact that I had no interest in 3 minutes ago, but now I've seen it created and now I want, and those are the things you've got to do. You've got to be able to stimulate the mind in other ways, like I said, beyond what the sign says. Just because the sign says cars, you got to have more than cars. Just because the sign says we have irons, you got to have more than irons and ironing boards. Show me some textiles, etc. Things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what, as a curator and someone writing exhibit labels, sorry, Phil. Thank you for jumping in, Phil. Phil said, last time I was at Lane Motor Museum, I can talk. Derek started a car and drove around the museum. Now that was stimulating, as many museums are so static. Yes, Lane Motor Museum, every day we're open to the public. 11 a.m. in the morning, we do a demonstration. We run one of our propeller cars right now and typically drive around one of our small vehicles, typically one of the electrics, and have a little fun with the crowd that is there. So that is one way to stimulate the visitors that are at the museum and get everyone's attention with a car with a propeller on it fires up in the middle of the museum. But, it's kind of exactly where I try to go, John, in writing exhibits, is to think about the, social and cultural stories that can go along with the car. Because every car person is going to love to eat up the technical specs on the car. They're going to come in and be like, "Oh, this is a horizontally opposed four-cylinder air-cooled engine, and this many cc's, and or this many cubic inches in a V8, and it's a small block Chevy." Those folks are always going to dig that, but getting to those other folks that you're trying to get interested. I think one of the reasons I wanted to bring this topic up was what we talked about, is that it's come up a lot in the last week or so in my life. And it does frequently because of my job. But the other thing is, I'm getting a little tired, and I think John and I, one of these next upcoming episodes, are going to talk about getting tired with the automotive hobby and some of the things that are going on in it. But I'm getting kind of tired of the typical car hobby just being about, and car museums, some of the car museums that are out there, just being about, like, the horsepower and the engine size and the year it was made, and man, cars were so much better back in the day, and all that, when we're talking about one of the most important technologies ever created in this world thus far to impact society and culture. I mean, it has had more impact on our lives than any artwork that Van Gogh did. And no knock to artwork. Artwork is amazing. But the things that we can study and learn from the development of the automobile, from the very earliest days of people attempting to figure out self propelled technology to today, is so overlooked in these automotive museums. And that is what's going to interest the majority of the world in the automobile. It's a finite number of us that are so passionate about the automobile that we can walk in somewhere and be okay with only knowing about the tech specs and a little bit of the story of that specific car. We want to catch the masses. We want to, eh, as John said, we need to better the public with these museums, and we need to start making more people understand how important the automobile is and has been in our lives. And the only way we're going to do it is through the museums and getting these people into the museums to help them learn about it. And it's just one of the things that's really, really driving me nuts right now. And kind of a big reason why I wanted to have this topic on the show. And, thankfully, John was like, "Yeah, let's do it, right? Let's talk about this." Because it's just so overlooked. And yeah, we're in another period of automotive history where things are changing rapidly, and there's a lot of technology being developed and moving quite quickly. And as I like to say, the other thing you can learn in a museum is that all of these new ideas, they're not really all new. Most of them are just improved ideas upon things that were done 100 years ago. Electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, all these different things. Done. Check. Done. Over. I mean, hydrogen is probably about the newest technology in the automotive world, right? Figuring out how to make an engine run on hydrogen and only exhaust water. That's relatively new. I'll give you that. I don't know of any hydrogen cars from the turn of the 1900s century.
I can go a
But
stretch for you on that.
well, there's compressed air cars.
Well, you
That's
have your
where I was going
compressed air
next.
cars, but
But
I was going, to me, hydrogen is the improvement on the steam car.
I'll give you that. I'll give you that. Hydrogen, yeah, I'll say that, John. That's a good one. I hadn't thought of it that way. Hydrogen is the improved steam car. Yeah, I like it. You just don't need a fire and boiler and all that. You just get it
Yes.
pre-tanked.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's really. I mean, it's what's really kind of impacting me right now in my career is automotive museums right now in the greater museum world, and for a long time it feels like they've been looked down upon by the other respective museums out there, art museums, history museums, natural history museums, yada yada yada, keep going. And the I number one, I don't understand why, because of what I just talked about, how important the automobile has been to this world and how much it has impacted and changed the world we live in. And you could say the same thing about aviation museums, because aviation took transportation to a whole nother level. The automobile let us move across the country. And, I mean, ships, right? Yeah. Okay. Ships let people move around the globe long before the automobile existed, but it also wasn't an easy trip. The airplane, man, that has changed global life immensely. And I think the only reason I can pinpoint that we, as a field of study, automotive history, transportation history, is looked down upon in some ways with our institutions by other museum institutions, is because of this exact fact that for some reason when we write the books, they're very well researched, they're very educational, they're very, in some cases, academic, right? But then when we go to do the museum and set up the exhibits, it's like, wow, don't be too academic. Those car folks that are coming in here, they don't want to be academic. They just want to know about the horsepower and I'm sorry, no. We have to do better in these automotive museum fields, or in these automotive museums, and it goes right back to what John said in the beginning. There are so many museums, automotive museums opening up, acting as tech shelters for collectors. that have small collections that don't care about the story of the automobile. There are some guys out there, there are some museums out there that were founded, and to be honest, the Lane Motor Museum was founded by Jeff Lane, a private collector who had a passion to teach people and educate people about the weird cars of this world. And that is what we still are today. Unique technology and weird cars from around the world. Where else are you going to find a gyroscopically balanced two-wheel car in a museum? Nowhere. But it's just the fact that those tax shelters, the small museums that open up, they're almost in some ways there just to stroke the ego of the collector. There's no public betterment in that. We have to do better as the real institutions. And so if No Driving Gloves had a museum, what would we have in it, John?
CRX. That's all. We just have one CRX. It explains it all.
Just one. Just one.
I don't
Just
know.
walk
As you were
into a two-car garage and there'd be one CRX, and that's the museum, folks.
hey, it works, and it'd be open 24/7.
Wax figures of Derek and John.
Diet Mountain Dew. No, I don't know, but I got thinking as you were talking about the impact of the automobile and recent changes. And yes, we discuss quite often that nothing in the automotive world is new. It's just we figured out how to really do it, or we're able to do it better, and things are developing. But the automobile, I'm gonna take a little license here and say is 140 years old. I think there have been so many changes, and so much has changed about the core automobile in the last 14 years, 10% of the automobile's life. This is going to be a very impactful time. And yes, I understand to some people, a car is a refrigerator. It's something they keep in the garage, and it's an appliance they do work with. But it is so much more. I've heard on a couple of various.
Hang on. Hold that thought. Hold your thought, because isn't that kind of a cool part of the story? That a technology that only took maybe, let's say, 50 years at most to go from being a novelty and a plaything of the rich to nothing more than an appliance to some people. Think about that part of the story. Like that's pretty amazing.
It's kind of hand in hand with the cell phone. It was a toy of the rich up until the mid 90s, when it was about a 25 or 30-year-old invention. And now you cannot live without the latest iPhone or the latest Galaxy, whatever we're on. And you can't live without a car. You've got to have your cell phone. You got to have your car. And these things have become very norm. But how did they get this way? Why are they this way? Are we right for having them this way? Those are the stories we've got to tell. And we'd have to figure out a way to do that with our museum. Yeah, you'd have your old technology and your new technology. And I've got a picture I took when I was surprised from again at the Barber Museum, where in the shop on the same day, I had to do some work on our Porsche 918 Spider. This is in 2015. Do work on our Porsche 918 Spider and do work on a 1914 Model T. You can't really, really 100 years apart of cars here. And you're going, there's a lot that's different, but there's a hell of a lot that is the same. And, if you say, I joked about the CRX museum, but that could be a museum, those two cars. What's alike and what's different. And to be honest, there's probably more alike between those two cars than what's different when you take the skin off. It's just, I don't know. I mean, to me,
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, it's yeah, in my opinion, we just I feel like we got to do better as automotive museums to respect the hobby and respect the vehicles and the significance of their history. And that's just my gloves off approach on automotive museums tonight. We'll see if I still have a career in the automotive museum field by the end of this year.
Well, it got to me, and I had to leave it. I mean, I still enjoy cars, and we've had an episode or two where I really had to step away from the car hobby for a period of time. And honestly, this podcast and being able to talk about it just kept me involved in the car hobby. And I'm finding myself getting back to the stuff I enjoyed, working with my hands, making things, and finding cars more and more fun. Um, so we just roll with the punches. And I think to sum up what I think Derek's question is, and the reason all the other institutions look and frown upon automotive museums so much is the people creating them aren't creating them for the right reasons, where a lot of the art museums and that are created for the right reasons. I'm not saying that no art museum is not a tax shelter, or there are tax shelter art museums and there are tax shelter. I don't know if there's tax shelter natural history museums, but
I'm sure there's probably a couple out there that are, guys that have massive collections of like dinosaur bones and things like that. I'll bet you we could find one if we dug.
I didn't think you could
Like that
privately
pun,
own.
like that little pun there. If we dug Natural History Museum, I didn't even catch that till I said it.
No, I totally missed it, but
Nah,
that's me trying to learn to listen.
who listens?
So we gonna
Hopefully our
wrap it up,
listeners.
or
I think we will.
or we gonna go on?
No, we're just over that hour mark, folks. And so, as always, I really hope you enjoyed the episode today, whenever you're listening to it. If you're on the live stream, thanks for joining us. And just remember, if you like what you hear, if you're enjoying being part of the No Driving Gloves community and you want to see that No Driving Gloves community grow, there's some things you can do. Number one, these wonderful QR codes you see on the screen. Buy us a coffee. Buy us many coffees. It helps the show, right? And of course, if you're on YouTube watching the live stream, hit the little golden bell there so you're alerted to when we are on and going live, as well as go to our social medias, Facebook, Instagram, all those wonderful places. Give us a like, make sure you follow us. And the biggest thing you can do, as I always like to say, if you want to help us grow, share the show.
And as I always like to say, because I'm not as needy as Derek, just get off your ass, go burn some gas, because we are out.